Clive Spong was the last of the main artists for the Railway series, illustrating the books from Really Useful Engines in 1983 up to Thomas and his friends, the final Railway series book to be published in 2011. As well as the numbered Railway series books, he also illustrated a number of other titles such as one-off stories and pop-up books. In keeping with the other Railway series artists, he has drawn engines in the background of some of his illustrations that we know next to nothing about, although earlier this year Spong himself named 3 of these engines in an interview, and these are the ones we'll be looking at today. It's time for me to pick up my pen and start drawing. Lincoln never appeared in a numbered entry in the Railway series, but instead shows up in a pop-up book adaptation of Troublesome Trucks, renamed James the Red Engine and the Troublesome Trucks. He takes the role of the little tank engine that arranges James's train, and jokes about James's bootlace incident to wind him up. In the original book this is a blue engine with side tanks, but this engine is a green saddle tank engine. It's difficult to tell what type of engine Lincoln is, since we only see him from the front and there doesn't seem to be an engine that matches his design perfectly, so all we have to go off is that he's a saddle tank engine with an exposed smoke box, and has to have been built sometime before 1925. In the end, I settled on a Fox Walker 060 saddle tank, similar to the ones that worked on the Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway. Given that this story takes place in the 1920s, I've decided to go for more of a Dolby style with this illustration in particular, especially since he drew the story from the original book. It has been theorised and even suggested by Christopher Awdry that Lincoln, or at least the little tank engine from the original story, may have been the Wellsworth and Sudbury Railway's number 4. But since I've already come up with my own idea for the 4th W&S engine, I've decided to go with a different backstory altogether for Lincoln. Let's just say that I'm glad Christopher merely said he may have been an ex-Wellsworth and Sudbury engine, and not that he definitely was. My line of thinking is that Lincoln was a contractor's locomotive who came to Sodor to help build Thomas's branch line, more specifically the extension of the original Tidmouth, Knapford and Elsbridge line to Farquhar, as well as the Quarry Tramroad. As for why he is at Tidmouth arranging James's train, well, my idea is that he finished building the Farquhar branch more quickly than everyone was expecting, and so he remained on Sodor for a while afterwards as a Tidmouth station pilot. This was during the period where the North Western Railway was going through some significant changes. The railway's eastern terminus being moved from Vickerstown to Barrow-in-Furness resulted in the railway's main headquarters being relocated to Tidmouth. Thomas now had a branch line to run, so neither of the line's termini had a station pilot of its own. Lincoln was kept around as a stopgap, although arrangements to acquire a station pilot of the NWR's own didn't manifest until after Lincoln had returned home. Other than Troublesome Trucks, there is one other line in James's book that implies the railway still had a station pilot. When James is arranging his train in James and the Bootlace, he complains that Gordon never has to fetch his own coaches. To be fair, later in the book we see James arranging the express for Gordon, but it's still a stark contrast from the beginning of Troublesome Engines, where all 3 of the big engines are usually sorting out their own trains. Anyway, here's Lincoln at the old Knapford Junction with a short train of supplies. He has just arrived on the island and is getting ready for a journey up the branch line to get started on the Farquhar extension. And with all that said, here is the finished picture. In Fire Escape, the third story in Gordon the High Speed engine, Gordon's fire bars collapse and Boko helps him to barrow in Furness. When they arrive, another engine is waiting to take Gordon's passengers. His number is 31120, but was recently named Dwayne by none other than Clive Spong himself. We don't really have anything to go off in terms of personality for this engine, although it is worth noting that Dwayne is a Class 31, the same type of engine as this guy, who you may remember I called Smithy in an earlier video of mine. Given that Smithy wasn't the biggest fan of steam engines, maybe Dwayne doesn't really care for them either. He certainly doesn't seem to show any concern for Gordon when he sees him being brought into the station by Boko. Maybe Dwayne wasn't necessarily anti-steam engine in the sense that he wanted to rid the world of them, but rather he was satisfied with the fact that steam engines can only be found on heritage railways, and Sodor of course. While Smithy was misled into believing that the end of steam would solve his problems, and got angry when it didn't, Dwayne's end goal was just to see the day where steam engines stopped cluttering up the national network, and now feels content. Needless to say, it didn't make him a very popular engine. The steam engines disliked him for obvious reasons, but even the majority of diesel engines found him kind of unpleasant to be around. Many diesel engines who were around for the demise of steam had since moved on, but Dwayne, ironically, was stuck in the past. He had wanted steam engines gone because he thought they were a relic of a bygone era, but now he himself was glorifying a bygone era, where the brave heroic diesel engines fought off the weak, inferior steam engines so they could have a brighter future. At this point, 20 years after the end of steam, there were more and more diesels like Smithy who had failed to notice any significant improvement to their lives. They had grown disillusioned with the idea that glory days were just round the corner, especially with the rise of electrification and multiple units, causing many older diesel engine designs to be withdrawn from service. And, being an older diesel engine himself, Dwayne was not at all safe. He was withdrawn from service in 1991 and scrapped a few years later. His colleagues and acquaintances responded with a resounding "eh". But, with that said and done, here is the finished drawing. Here's the last of the named Clive Spong background engines. His name is Eddy and he is a Class 115 diesel multiple unit. Once again, nothing is really known about him. All we know is that he was meant to take a rail tour to Carlisle, but broke down in Barrow, and Gordon, being the only engine available, took his passengers and continued the rail tour. Other than that, nothing. My thinking is that unlike Dwayne, Eddy has never really had any ill will towards the steam engines. In fact, he enjoys their company and getting to know them better. When he was first built in the early 1960s, the steam engines would often keep their distance or ignore him due to the whole dieselisation thing going on at the time. However, the steam engines that did decide to open up to him were quick to realise that he was a friendly sort. Not there to cause trouble, just there to transport passengers and have a friendly chat. One of the reasons he got on so well with the steam engines was that many of the other diesels wouldn't give him the time of day. Eddy had a tendency to break down, and the diesels who were obsessed with the abolition of steam accused Eddy of letting the side down. With this in mind, Eddy felt that he had more in common with the steam engines, since the majority of diesel engines didn't like them either. Some of the steam engines took offence to this at first. Why would a faulty engine relate to them? Is he accusing them of being faulty as well? Of course that wasn't the case, but in the age of dieselisation and rising tensions between the steamies and diesels, the steam engines were often very alert and wary. This began to change when Eddy met Edward. Edward didn't travel to Barrow-in-Furness very often, but he would occasionally make trips there if required. He was the first steam engine to really open up to Eddy. It was clear to Edward that Eddy's wants and needs were no different from the average steam engine. Just replace coal and water with diesel oil. Now you may be wondering who the engine on the left is. If you've watched my Cryptids of Sodor video, you may have an idea. In that video I draw Super Ed or Super Ed, but in the style of the TV series. It probably wouldn't be worth dedicating a whole segment to drawing him in the Railway series style, since it would largely be treading the same ground as that video. But I figured it would be worth having a bash at drawing him as a Railway series character in the background. I'm sure you can guess why I drew these three characters in particular when you think about their names for a second. And so, here is the completed image. And that was three background engines, originally illustrated and named by Clive Spong, and now re-illustrated by myself. Lincoln was pretty straightforward to adapt, but I feel as though the other two were perhaps the blankest of blank canvases I've covered on this channel in quite a while. I hope you've enjoyed my takes on these three engines, enough to like the video and subscribe if you haven't done so already.